Shalom. We are continuing Shmuel Beis. We're up to Perek Chaf Gimel, and this is towards the very end of David HaMelech's life. And after we had the very long Shira of Perek Chaf Beis, which is the Shira of gratitude and thanksgiving, we have a final Shira of David, which is described as his last words. Now, this does not mean literally his last words, but the Meforshim say, or Rashi says, that these are the last words that were with Ruach HaKodesh from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this represents the summation of what his life is about. V'ela divrei David ha'achreinim. These are the final words of David. David is 70 years old, which were said Beruach HaKodesh. Noam, so now it begins. Noam David ben Yishai. These are the words of David ben Yishai. Noam HaGever Hukam Ol. These are the words of the one who was raised to the highest position. I was a shepherd. I was a nobody. But Hashem picked me from the flock to make me a melech. Mashiach Elokei Yaakov, the anointed, designated one of Hashem, of Yaakov. Ne'im Zemirais, and the sweet singer of songs of Yisrael. Right? David HaMelech is called Ne'im Zemirot, the sweet singer of songs. And now the actual Shira, it's relatively short, although very, very obscure. Ruach Hashem diber bi. It is the Spirit of God that is speaking through me. Milaso, it is Hashem's words, Halashon, that are on my tongue. Now, it's not clear, does he mean now? Or does he mean that David's whole life, he was just an instrument and a conduit for Hashem's words? Amar Elokei Yisrael, Hashem, the God of Israel, said, Li diber tzur Yisrael, to me, the rock of Yisrael, that we could always depend on, said to me. And what was the message? Moshel bi Adam Tzadik, Moshel Yiras Elokim. That the true ruler of a person is not a king or a politician or a president. The true ruler of a person is a tzaddik, who rules by the fear of Hashem. And what that really means is, as Pirkei Avos tells us, Ezeyu Gibor, HaKovesh es Yitzray, who is a true Gibor, one who conquers his Yetzer Hara. And the Pasuk says in Mishlei by David HaMelech's son, Moshel Baruchai, he who rules over his Yetzer Hara, Miloich Edir, is greater than one who conquers a city. The true Moshel Bi'adam is the tzaddik, that is a Moshel through Yiras Elokim. And through that struggle, Uchaor Baiker Yizrach Shamesh, just like after the long dark night, there will eventually be the light of the dawn, and after dawn, the shining of the sun. So too, the darkness of struggling with my Yetzer Hara, the long night, will bring light. And this also refers to the history of Am Yisrael, to the history of the Galus. There will be eventually light. Baiker lo yavais, it will be a morning without clouds. Minaiga, full of brightness. Mimtar desha, where the grass will grow through the rains that have fallen. Again, it's a mashal for the number one. As I say, there are two messages: the nitzachain over the Yetzer Hara, and the eventual geula of Am Yisrael. Kilo chain, Beisi, imkel. Now, this is a difficult pasuk. My house with Hashem was not this way. Now, what does he mean, not this way? He just described a beautiful light of the sun and the grass growing. So he explains that it's going, Rashi explains, again, it's very shver lashon, that he described the morning that will come as a morning without clouds, boker lo avais, And when it says, my house is not that way, it means the bracha that Hashem has given me is there will be no clouds. When that geula comes, there will not be clouds. Ki bris olam samli. Hashem made an eternal covenant with Malchus Beis David, Arucha Bakol, that is set out in detail, Ushmura, that is going to be kept, Ki chol yishi v'chol chayfetz, all of my prayers, my shava, my crying, and all of my desire, Ki lo yatzmiach, that it should not grow. Now again, very, very difficult. It should not grow. In the pasuk, the antecedent is his bias. So how could he say it should not grow? So Rashi says that the it is referring to other malchiyos, that there should be no other malchus that will impede or interfere with the geula of Am Yisrael. Again, grammatically, this is quite difficult. Ubalial, and those people and those nations, Belial, without the yoke of heaven, that are cruel and reject God, Kikaitz munad kulaham, they are like the thorns that if you touch them and connect to them, you're going to scratch yourself. Ki lo biyad yikocha, you dare not take it with your hand. If you want to touch those thorns, you have to take a metal tool like a sword or a scissors or a spear. Or take fire and burn them in place. So David's prayer is that don't form political alliances with evildoers and Rishayim, because even if in the short term they seem to be offering you something, they are like handling thorns. So this is kind of David's warning, I guess, that as the Malchus Beis David continues, we should beware of alliances with Rishayim. And indeed, in the book of Malachim, we're going to see that occasionally the Malchei Beis David were nichshel. So this is the end of Divrei David HaAcharainim. So the Rishainim was the very long Shira in Perek Chaf Beis, and the Acharainim is this final Shira. So now we have kind of a listing of David's military heroes, and again, it's a little difficult to touch up all of these psukim. We'll try to do the best we can, but we will not be able to go over all of the different meforshim. So the pasuk says, Eila Shemais Hagibayrim Asher LeDavid. The following are the names of the great heroes that belong to David. Now, this is two elements here. On one hand, these are the great military heroes who are famous for their exploits. On the other hand, Chazal also say these were great Talmidei Chachamim and great tzaddikim. So the notion of Gibayrim has a double mashmais. It has the mashmais of a Gibor Milchama, and it has the mashmais of a Gibor that is Kaivesh Es Yitzrei. And the number one person who is the greatest of David's Gibayrim, in both of those senses, is actually someone we've never heard before. It calls him Yeshev Basheves Tachkameini, he who dwells in the assembly of Chachma. So he was the great Gibor, but he was Isaac in the Chachma of Torah. Reish HaShalishi, he was the first of the band of three, because we're going to see that David's highest madrega of Gibayrim are three people. And the number one of these three greatest people is a person called Adino Hoetzny. Adinai from Etzion. And it gives a military exploit. Al Shmeina Meyais Cholo B'Pamachas. He was once able to kill 800 enemies at one time. So on one level, it's describing a Superman, but again, Chazal interpret that this also refers to his greatness in Torah, being able to shlug up, being able to be able to refute 800 Chachamim, b'pamachas, and this is Adinai Ho'etzni. Actually, Chazal have a drasha that perhaps this is a kinoi for David HaMelech himself, but that is vadai not the Pashut Pshat, because we see Adinai is counted as a Gibor LeDavid. Now, he was the first of the big three, and then we have the other two people who were the most innermost circle, V'yacharav, and after Adinai is Elazar ben Dodo ben Achoichi. Right, he was the second one. Bishleisha Gibayrim im David. He was one of the three super Gibayrim of David. B'charfam ba'plishtim. When the Philistines, this is not Goliath, this was later, when the Philistines were blaspheming Am Yisrael, Nesfu Sham L'Milchama, and they gathered in war, V'yalu Ish Yisrael, and the Jews were fighting the Philistines. And who come? This is the second of the three. Elazar ben Daidai got up, V'yach ba'plishtim, and again, single-handedly, he was smiting the Plishtim, Ad ki yaga yado, until his hand was exhausted, it kind of got paralyzed. Vatidbak yadai halacherev, in other words, it kind of locked up. His hand was stuck to the sword, he couldn't move his hand. Vayas Hashem teshua gedela b'yamahu, but Hashem made a miracle that day. V'ya'am yashuvu achrav, in other words, the second one is Elazar ben Dodo was able to kill the enemy in spite of his muscular paralysis, and the people came in, Rach Lefashet, only to take away the spoils. They were not even needed in the Milchama. And the third of the three of the inner circle is Acharav Shama ben Ogeh Harari, Vayas, and here it gives a story, right? So these are the three, right? So the three are Adinai Ho'etzni, Elazar ben Dodo, and Shama ben Ogeh. And each of them has a story. Adina Ho'etzni once killed 800 people single-handedly. Elazar did a similar thing, although we're not given the number, against the Plishtim. And Shama ben Ogeh also had a very singular heroic act, again against the Plishtim. V'yayasvu Plishtim l'chaya. The Plishtim gathered together to like wild animals. Vatihi sham chelkas hasadeh, and there was a field, muleya adashim, filled with lentils. We'll see why that's important in a moment. V'ha'am nas mipnei Plishtim, and people were fleeing. But vayisyatzei b'seich hachelka, but Shama stood in the middle of that lentil field. Vayatzi leha, and he saved that field. Vayachis haplishtim. Vayas Hashem teshua gedayla, and God made a great salvation. I'll come back to this story in a moment. So these are the big three who were considered to be the greatest Gibayrim in David HaMelech's army. Now, then it says, Vayerdu sholoisha me'ashleishim, Reish. So there's a second group of three out of a total of 30, but essentially we're going to see that David's heroes, David had a big army obviously, but his heroes are two groups. Top group of three, second group of three, and then another 30 altogether. So now we're describing the second group of three. And there's a story, V'yavayo el Katsir el David. They came to David at the time of the harvest. El Ma'aras Adulam, David was hiding in the cave of Adulam. This is when Shaul was out to get him. This is already before David even became Melech, so this was very early in his career. V'chayas Pelishtim chayne be'emek Rephaim, and the wild animals, so to speak, of the Philistines were encamping in Emek Rephaim. V'David az b'matzuda, David was holed up in the tower. Umatzav Pelishtim az Beis Lechem, and the Pelishtim were in Beis Lechem ready to attack. Vayisaveh David vayaymer, and David got very thirsty, and David simply said, Oy vey, mi yashkeni mayim mi bor Beis Lechem asher b'shar. If only somebody could get me water from the well of Beis Lechem where the Philistines were encamping. And here it says, Vayivku. Now David didn't mean anybody should go there. That would endanger their lives. But this second group of three broke through B'machane Pelishtim. They did a heroic effort to bring David water. Vayishavu mayim mibor Beis Lechem asher b'shar. Vayisu v'yaviyu el David. But David didn't want to drink it because David said, Chas v'shalom, how could I cause people to risk their lives for me? I didn't mean that they should go. And therefore, Vayaseh chesam l'Hashem, he poured the water to Hashem. Now again, remember, this is before the Beis HaMikdash. Bamais are permitted, and even Nisuch HaMayim would be permitted, even though it wasn't Sukkot. And David said, if this water was obtained by Mesiras Nefesh, and by people risking their lives for me, it's not right that I should benefit from someone. If you risked your life, let it be given to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayomer, and David said, Cholilo li Hashem mi'aseisi zais. God forbid that I should cause anybody, other than milchama, but for a private need like drinking water, that I should cause people to risk their lives. Hadamo anashim ha'olchem b'nafshaisam, that people risk their lives to get me water. V'lai ava lishtaisam. Eila asu shalayshes hagibayrim. This was done by, well, again, so machlekes. Are we talking about the second group of three, or is this is still the first group of three? We don't know for sure. It's a little ambiguous because the names of the second group of three are not introduced until the next pasuk. Now, the Gemara in Bava Kama kind of combines the two stories, and the Radak says it's very schwer because they are two stories. One story was about how the lentil field was saved from the Philistines, and the other story is how the three Gibayrim brought David water from the Bor Beis Lechem. And the Gemara in Bava Kama combines it into one big story. And the Gemara in Bava Kama says that when David wanted water from Beis Lechem, it actually meant he wasn't thirsty for water. It actually meant he had a halachic shaila, and he wanted hadracha and a psak, and Torah is nimshelas l'mayim. And the shaila was, I'm only going to mention one of them on the Amram because it's a little bit of a complicated sugya. The Pelishtim were hiding in ambush in this lentil field. And David wanted to know, does he have reshus to destroy the field in order to kill the Pelishtim? Because the field belonged to a Jew. Are you allowed to be matzil by destroying somebody else's mammon? And they essentially, so Taisus explains, of course you're allowed to destroy, because even if it's gezel or mazik, it's mutter b'makam bikuach nefesh. But David was not asking, is he allowed to burn the field? Of course he's allowed to burn the field. But David was asking, if I burn the field because of bikuach nefesh, am I mechuyev to pay? Because after all, if I'm allowed to destroy the field, maybe I don't have to pay, right? Matzel atzma b'mamen chaverai, are you mechuyev to pay? And this was David's shaila. Am I mechuyev to pay for burning down this field? And the psak was, a normal person is mechuyev to pay, but a melech has unique powers. And when it says David didn't want to drink the water that means David did not want to take advantage of his status as Melech, and therefore, if the halacha normally is that if you're matzil atzmai b'mamen chaverei, you have to pay, David was going to pay the owner of the field, and that is the meaning of the lentil field being saved. Saved, in other words, even though it was destroyed, the economic value was saved because David paid. And that's what it means. He poured the water to Hashem. He was given a psak that he didn't have to pay because he was a melech, but in order to make a kiddush Hashem, because if he would take advantage of that, people would say, oh, the king does whatever he wants. He gave up that psak to be machabed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the Radak says this is not Karav Lipshat at all, but this is the drasha of the Gemara in Bava Kama. So again, the pashtus is that these are the heroic exploits of the first three. We're now introducing the second group of three, and this is the first familiar name, Avishai. Avishai is Yoav's brother, which is also David's nephew. Avishai Achi Yoav ben Tzeruya hu Rosh HaShlosha. He is the head of the second group of three. V'hu oreris chaniso al sholosh me'os chalal. He was once able to kill 300 Philistines. V'lo shem bashlosha. And he has the greatest prestige in the second group. Min hashlosha hachi nichbad. He is the greatest of the second group of three. Vayihi lahem lasar. And he was their head. But ad hashlosha loba. So he was the greatest of the second group of three, but he did not reach the status of the first group of three. Now, the second member of the second group of three is also a familiar person. See, again, it's interesting to me that throughout the book of Shmuel, we know much more about the second group of three than the first group, because the second person in the second group of three is mentioned many times. This is Benayahu ben Yehoyada, ben Ishchai. He was a man of great life and energy. We go as Ben Ishchayel. Actually, the Ben Ishchai got all of his Sfarim's names from this pasuk, but here the Girsa is Ben Ishchayel, a man of great heroism. Rav Pa'alim, great in deeds. Mikavtzael, from the town of Kavtzael. Hu hika es Shnei Ariel Moav. He smote the two rulers of Moav. V'hu yarad v'hika es Ari b'toch habor. And there was one time he even killed a lion in a pit that was attacking people. B'yom hashelag, in the middle of the winter stormy day. And hu hika es Mitzri asher ishmare. He once killed a great Egyptian hero who was a man of fearsome appearance. Ubiyada Mitzri Chanis, and in the hand of this Egyptian there was a spear. Vayered Elav Bashavet, and all Benayo had was a stick. Vayigzael es Chanis miyada Mitzri, he was able to steal the spear from the Mitzri. Vayargeu b'chaniso, and he killed him with his own spear. Eila Asa Benayo ben Yehoyada, these were the heroic exploits of Benayo ben Yehoyada. V'loi Shem b'shleisha gibarim, and he too is famous among the second group of three, and that's what it says. Min hashleishim nichbad, he is greater than the 30. That's going to be the third group. V'yel hashlosha loiba, but he did not reach the status of the first three. Vayisimeyu David el mashmato, and David took him out of military service, and David made him an advisor that David could listen to as Devar Chachma. Now, so we've mentioned three of the top three, and we've mentioned two names of the second three, but actually it is not recorded directly who is the third person, because we then go into the list of 30. So we're missing one person. So many Meforshim say that although Pasuk Chavdalid seems to be introducing the list of 30. In fact, Asael, who is Yoav's brother, is the third. Right, so it turns out Yoav had Yoav had two brothers. There's Avishai, Yoav, Asael. Now Yoav, by the way, please note, Yoav is not on this list at all. We'll come back to Yoav. Yoav is not even mentioned in this list. But Yoav's two brothers. Now Asael was killed, so this list was compiled much earlier in David's reign. Asael is in fact not alive by the end of David's life. But Asael is the third. So the second group of three is Avishai, Benayahu, Asael. So now we've done a total of 6. 3 of the top three, the second 3, and now we have a list of 30. So actually, though, if Asael is the third of the second 3, you only have 29, but you'll see the Malbim splits one of the names into 2, so I'll go over this. So now we have a list of 30. This is a list of names. Elchanan ben Dodo from Beis Lechem, Shama HaCharadi, a second person, Alika HaCharodi, is third person. Cheletz HaPalti, these are cities. Cheletz from Peletz, Ira ben Ikesh HaTekoi, Aviezer HaAnsosi from Anasais, Mevunai HaChushasi, Salmain HaAchaichi, Marai HaNataifasi, Chalev ben Bana HaNatofasi, Itai ben Rivai Migivas b'nei Binyamin, Binayo Pirasoni, Chidai mi Nachale Goash, Alvi Elbain Haravasi Azmaves Habarachamum. Again, the second word is always the city. El Yachba Hashalavoni, Bnei Yoshen, from the family of Yoshen, Yehonasan, Shama Harari, Achiam ben Shoror Harari, Elifelet ben Achsabai, Ben Hamachasi. So the Malbim splits it up. Elifelet ben Achsabai is one person. Ben Hamachasi is another person. That's how you get 30 now. Eliam ben Achitaifel Agilaini. Remember, Achitaifel was an advisor who committed suicide, but Eliam was one of the Gibarei David, even though Achisaifel went over to Avshalom. Chetzri HaKarmeli, Pari HaArbi, Yigal ben Nasan from Tzaiva, Bani Hagadi from Gad, Selek HaAmayni. Amayni does not mean he was from Ammon, but he lived in Ammonite territory. Nachrai HaBeiraisi, and these last people also were Nosei Klei Yayav ben Tzeruya. They were the carriers of Yayav's weapons. Ira HaYisri, Garav HaYisri, and the last one is Uriah HaChiti. So obviously Uriah's already dead, so this is an early list. And the sum total is 37. So here you have a problem. We mentioned the first 3, and we mentioned the second 3, and then you get a cheshbon of 30. So all you get is 36. How could there be 37? So the pashtus is, there are different interpretations, many interpretations. But the pashtus is, the 37th is actually the highest in the ranks, and that is Yayav ben Tzeruya, who no matter what he's done, and David has many, many tainas on him, Yayav is the general in charge of everybody. So in some ways it might be that Yayav is not enumerated in the list. There's a certain remez that David HaMelech has hakpada against Yayav, but Yayav is the 37. So again, it's a very, very difficult perek technically to figure out all the names, but the way we're learning is Adino Ho'etzni is the first of the third, and the second is Elazar ben Dodo, and the third is Shama ben Ageh. That's the top 3. In the second 3 is Avishai, Benayo ben Yehoyada, and Asael. Avishai and Asael are brothers. So it's 3 and 3. Then you have 30. So that gives you 36. And the 37th that is not mentioned in the enumeration is Yayav ben Tzeruya. Ad Kan.